We are live from Libya. This is at Benghazi, and this is another live episode of War Zones with Andrew Fox, myself, James Glancy. And yes, as I said, here I am on the beach, looking out over the Mediterranean. Less than 7 years ago, this was a complete war zone where General Haftar's forces were trying to retake eastern Libya from ISIS. It was a brutal and bloody battle, and I've been around some of the ruins of the city where the place has been completely smashed to pieces. But Andy, good to see you. We've had a bit of a break since Ukraine, and we're back.
We have. And it's your turn to do the exciting travelling this time. Last time it was me in Gaza. It's my turn to interview you. So let's talk about that damage and destruction. How much reconstruction are you seeing there? Everyone's talking about reconstruction in Gaza and the trillions it's going to need to rebuild that place. I'm guessing from what you're saying that Libya hasn't had anything like that level of support.
My first impressions are that when you talk to Lebanese people, they're generally pro-British, but they said that Sarkozy and Cameron came here after the victory of getting rid of Gaddafi. They promised the world, promised that we'd stay, promised that we'd rebuild the place. Then they left and never looked back and haven't helped. And that's the feeling. It's another feeling of the West promises all these things and leaves. However, there is a master plan not dissimilar to you see with the Saudis, with the Qataris, with the Emiratis. They have got these models and these plans and these investment concepts to regenerate this coastline and make it Dubai in the Mediterranean. And they've actually got the investment in place. They've actually started digging the foundations of new hotels. There's a golf course just being built over there. They're taking this straight out of the UAE playbook, and they've got partnerships with Emaar, the big construction company in UAE. So they're not messing around. They've got their Arab brothers. They're working with them. They're getting on with it. And the other thing I'd say is there's no potholes in the roads. Their roads are better than British roads.
Better than Ukrainian roads, certainly. That was quite the adventure. But are you seeing any signs of ISIS in Libya? Do they still have a foothold that you're aware of?
Not in Benghazi. I asked about Sirte, which is where we saw those horrendous scenes where ISIS lined up Coptic Christians and beheaded them over the Mediterranean, facing towards Europe to make a point that we're going to conquer you next, and no one is safe. Now, I think they've been pushed south into the desert. If you think a lot of ISIS fighters are actually not locals, they are, when you get a period of instability or governmental instability in a region, they're drawn to that to try and capitalize on it. So where Britain, America has got involved and created regional conflicts and not stayed to provide stability, you create this vacuum. And that very much happened here after he deposed of Gaddafi. Now, Haftar and his forces have got a complete grip of this area to the extent that they are welcoming entourages from around the Middle East looking to invest in this place. People want to buy property here. They see this as a massive opportunity. Tripoli, I've not been there, so I don't really have a place to comment on it. I know it's not quite as stable, but of course you've got two rival governments. You've got the Haftar faction and you've got the faction in Tripoli.
Yeah, I mean, is it worth reminding people of actually how this came about? Let's talk about Operation Ellamy, shall we? So Operation Ellamy was the British, French, American combined operation. It was air only, less a few ninja types running around on the ground. But for the most part, it was a little smile there from Mr. Glancy. For the most part, it was an air campaign. And the rationale behind it was something called R2P, the responsibility to protect, which was the UN's way in the sort of 90s and early 2000s of circumventing the way in which you can legally go to war. So there are only two reasons that you could do it. One is self-defense and one is if you're invited in by another country. Now, neither of those applied. And yet David Cameron was insistent that Gaddafi was about to start massacring people in huge numbers. And therefore, the international community had an obligation to go in and take military action to stop that massacre from happening. Unfortunately, what happened was we decapitated the Libyan state. We provided no kind of stabilization or replacement government. The country fell apart. It descended into this vicious civil war between ISIS and Haftar's forces, as James has described. And it's taken them a really long road to get back from that point. So a real failure of foreign policy. It was a disaster for Europe because it sparked off that unbelievable migrant wave that came across the Mediterranean through Greece, Italy, and then into the rest of the continent of Europe. So a lot of the migration problems we've seen over the last 10 years originate in Libya. So, James, have you seen much sight of that? People smuggling, the migrant piece. Is that evident when you're on the ground there?
Right now, so these beaches behind me, all the way along this coastline, they're relatively flat, and they're former part of these Posidonia seagrasses, these shallows, which go out about 5 to 10 kilometers. They're very, very biodiverse areas, great for fishing. Now, these have been the areas historically over the last few years where refugee boats or immigrant boats have been launched towards Greece. And if they were leaving from these beaches, they'd be going towards Greece. But if they're further to the east or towards Tunisia, they're going to Lampedusa, they're going to Sicily, Pantelleria, because those are the closest points to get into Europe. It's interesting phraseology because this country is stable, or this part of Libya is stable. So these people, anyone coming through here is not fleeing war. They're going to Europe seeking a better life. They're economic migrants. They may be fleeing something worse elsewhere in Africa, but this place is stability. There's no persecution. And back to that question about ISIS. I believe there are elements probably in the south, but we're really not where we are now. And it's interesting that we straight away locked onto ISIS and to refugees, because that seems to be the only thing that the West is interested in talking about when you're talking about North Africa or Africa. Is there an ISIS problem and is there a refugee problem? We're not really talking about stability, investment, trying to build this place up. And that, again, I said that at the beginning, that's the real frustration, but it's also a missed opportunity. We have huge history here. Not long along the coast is Tobruk. There are many battle honours in the British armed forces and the British military of Tobruk. They do actually feel a bit of an affection with us. So, I'd like to see the British government engaging more with both Haftar and the government in Tripoli. But one of the most crazy things is that you cannot fly directly from Europe or Britain to Libya. You have to go via Istanbul. So all the investment that's going on here really is coming from Turkey. It's coming from the Middle East.
That's fascinating. And are you seeing much Russian involvement? We hear lots of stories about Wagner and their kind of people smuggling activities. And actually, Henry Jackson Society have got a paper coming out on this imminently. So that's going to be interesting. But are you seeing any evidence of that on the ground at all?
It's a good question. We'll probably talk about it more when I get back. I've been asking, where's Wagner? Where are the Russians? I know they're here. And that not much has been said about it. Now, we did hear that when Assad fell in Syria, he obviously lost his major regional ally, and they had their naval base, Tartus, I believe it was, on the coast. Really important foothold into the Mediterranean for Russia. I had thought that they had moved from Tartus to Libya, but I'm literally looking over here. In fact, let me just swing that round. That is the main port behind me in Benghazi. There's no military. There's no military there. There's no naval forces there. The Russians are not here, and I'm not seeing Russians in hotels. Which you go to African countries and you'll see them in hotel lobbies. When I got off the plane, there was actually an Italian diplomatic delegation getting off. Obviously, they wanted to talk about the migrant crisis, but they're not talking. They're not here. So I know the Russians are here somewhere. I know Wagner's here somewhere, but it's certainly not overt here in Benghazi.
James Glancy and the search for the hidden Russians. But you go even to Limassol. Even ports like that are heaving with Russians in Cyprus. So that's fascinating that they're obviously either keeping it on the low down or they maybe even using an area further along the coast. So that's fascinating. Yeah, and is there anything else that's really jumped out at you of your time there? Is there anything that's really surprised you?
Well, I know there are hopes from government here to improve relations with Britain. I know that senior members of the government here would like to visit Britain and discuss everything from normalization of relations, trade, investment. The That's what I got, was more of a, we're interested in the West beyond talking about terrorism, beyond talking about immigration. So I'd like to see us engage. The difference I found here so far compared to being in Tunisia, and I've been to Tunisia quite a lot of the last few years, is I'm not seeing Palestinian flags. I'm not sensing that that strong bond. You go to Tunisia, you see people wearing football tops, but particularly well, you see the flags, you see much more solidarity, and you also see in the fish markets in Tunisia portraits of Saddam Hussein. So there is a real different feel. There's definitely that feel that they've got this 2030 vision and beyond to be much more orientated between the Middle East and the West, and unlike some of the more the poorer regions of Tunisia. But I wanted to come on to, because I've got you here, and I know you're talking to me here in Libya, but I did want to get your thoughts, because I know you've been busy doing media stuff on this phase of war, or the next phase that Netanyahu has engaged upon in Gaza, because it looks like they're going all out to clear the strip.
They are, and I was speaking to my OSINT guys, so my open source intelligence team that I work with, and you can follow Stinky on X if you really want to see the maps firsthand. But he was showing me the updates, and it looks like they're cruising through Gaza City with very, very little resistance. Hamas have done exactly what I predicted they'd do, and are melting away as much as possible, fleeing where they can, hiding if they have to, and not taking the IDF on in any real direct combat. Just with the occasional opportunist ambush, and I know the IDF have lost maybe 5 or 6 soldiers in the last week. Even down in Rafah, there were 4 officers killed in a Humvee. They were expecting the area to be clear. They were running around with no armor on the vehicle, and they got nailed in an ambush, unfortunately. So that the IDF are still taking hits. Hamas are doing exactly as I predicted. And what that means is that this clearance of Gaza City is simply not going to be the end of Hamas. It's a war goal that I think is unachievable. You're not going to delete an entire terrorist group just by bombing them from the sky. It's just militarily not possible, and I'm sure you'll agree with me on that. So the what next is going to be really interesting. Just today, Mark Carney in the United Nations announced an international force idea involving Arab troops, which is an interesting one, frankly. If the IDF couldn't pacify Hamas, I don't see that an Arab force will be able to. And then on top of that, Canadian troops even potentially involved. Basra Part 2, Kandahar Part 2. And my reaction was the same as yours. It was head-shaking astonishment. So the what next is the big question. I think what you're telling us about Libya is a really interesting parallel, because if you don't do something after the war, you're missing a huge opportunity to create economic development. And of course, it's economic development that eventually will lead to peace.
Well, look, I've got to go now. I've got someone from chaperoning me and saying, "What are you doing?" and making phone calls. So I'm sure the secret police are about to turn up at some point and interrogate me. So I probably need to make myself scarce. What I would say to those of you that know that Andrew and I are in Ukraine, obviously we're doing lives there, which you can pick up on both our Substacks. But we're in the Outpost is busy in the edit, and we will have our short documentary about our time in Ukraine and the situation there. And we will be following up. I'm sure we'll be going back there next year. But look out, watch this space for Ukraine. I'm just going to leave you and try and avoid getting arrested.
Take care, mate. Hope that SEER training doesn't come in handy.
Cheers, mate. Cheers, mate. Bye.
Bye.